Most women have, at some point, encountered the suffocating dilemma of setting a boundary. A simple, firm line in the sand, a no to an overstep, a request for space, a declaration of what is and is not acceptable. Yet, in the moment of truth, or too curious paralysis takes hold. The lips form the word, but the voice falters. The resolve shatters under the weight of an unbidden anxiety. Why? Why does a gesture meant to protect one's own inner world so often feel like an act of aggression, a selfish betrayal of a perceived harmony? This is the central paradox of the unindividuated feminine, the deeply ingrained, ancient wiring that equates self-preservation with relational sabotage. The script in her unconscious, written by 1,000 years of cultural conditioning, whispers that her value is contingent upon her compliance, her malleability, her ability to soothe and accommodate the desires of others, especially the masculine. The woman who sets a boundary from a place of fear is a woman still tethered to her shadow. This is not a malicious shadow, but a weeded one, a composite of all the times her needs were dismissed, her voice silenced, her pain trivialized. It is the echo of a little girl learning that to be loved is to be liked, and to be liked is to never make a wave. Her fear of a man's disapproval, his withdrawal of affection, or his fleeting anger is not just about him. It is a primal terror of being abandoned by the very source of her perceived worth. When she says no, she is not just defending her personal space. She is battling the ghost of rejection that lives within her. She is anticipating the masculine ego's recoil, its hurt, its petulance, its projection of blame, and she internalizes this anticipated reaction as a failure on her part. She believes, at a subconscious level, that the man's emotional response is a direct mirror of her own inadequacy. This is the tragic dance of the unindividuated ego, the complete fusion of her self-worth with an external, unstable variable, a man's opinion of her. The psyche, in its infinite wisdom, constructs elaborate defense mechanisms to avoid this perceived abandonment. She becomes a master of the covert boundary, the passive-aggressive sigh, the cold shoulder, the silent withdrawal. She hopes that her partner will intuit her discomfort, that he will just know what she needs, without her ever having to risk a direct confrontation. This is a form of self-deception, a refusal to fully own her needs and desires. It is a projection of a childlike fantasy onto an adult relationship, a longing for a partner to act as a psychic extension of herself, to anticipate her every need. But men, as archetypal forces, are often blind to this silent language. Their masculine unconscious, driven by a different set of directives, seeks clarity, directness, and challenge. When faced with a woman's unspoken needs and passive-aggressive cues, the masculine ego often becomes confused, frustrated, and ultimately detached. He cannot fight a phantom enemy, and he cannot honor a boundary that has never been explicitly stated. He will either trample it unknowingly or, in his frustration, withdraw, confirming her deepest, most paralyzing fear. Consider the contrast, the woman who understands her power. This is the woman who has done her shadow work. She has faced the terrified little girl within and has learned to parent her. She knows that her value is not a negotiation, and that her worth is not a gift from a man to be earned or revoked. Her boundaries are not walls built from a fear of invasion, but are instead sacred perimeters of a sovereign self. They are not a reaction to his behavior, but a clear, calm declaration of her own values. She does not say no out of fear of what he might do, but out of a deep and unshakable reverence for her own inner world. Her boundaries are an extension of her lax, a manifestation of her individuation. She has integrated the masculine energy within her own psyche, the animus, and uses its power for discernment and decisive action. Her no is not an apology, it is a statement of truth. When she asserts herself, she does so not with anger or resentment, but with the cool, unwavering clarity of a queen setting the rules of her own domain. She understands that a man who respects her power is a man of substance, and a man who resents her autonomy is a man still trapped in the adolescent drama of his own unexamined ego. She is not afraid to walk away from a man who cannot meet her at this level. This detachment, this refusal to cling, is the ultimate expression of her self-possession. It is the wisdom of a woman who has realized that her ultimate relationship is not with a man, but with her own soul. The unindividuated woman still bound by the chains of her own perceived worthlessness, often mistakes accommodation for love. She believes that by sacrificing her own needs and wants, she is demonstrating her devotion, her loyalty, her feminine essence. This is the martyr archetype, in full bloom, a subtle, often unconscious performance, designed to elicit gratitude and validation from a man. She will bend her schedule, ignore her fatigue, and suppress her true feelings, all under the guise of being easygoing or supportive. But this is a hollow exchange. True love, as the Stoics understood it, is not a transaction based on sacrifice and debt. It is a communion between two whole, self-possessed beings. A man of substance does not desire a woman who is a mirror of his own will. He craves a woman who stands as a separate, powerful force in her own right. He seeks a partner, not a subordinate. The woman who performs martyrdom is ultimately disrespecting herself, and in doing so, she inadvertently invites a man to disrespect her as well. She teaches him, through her actions, that her boundaries are fluid, her desires negotiable, and her self-respect conditional. The woman of power, in stark contrast, understands that her authenticity is her greatest gift. She does not perform for a man, she does herself. Her boundaries are not a negotiation, they are a statement of her identity. When she says no, it is not a rejection of him, but an affirmation of herself. She refuses to engage in the exhausting, transactional dance of passive-aggressive martyrdom. Instead, she brings her whole, uncompromised self to the relationship. She understands that a man who truly loves her will not see her boundaries as obstacles, but as the very lines that define the magnificent being he is drawn to. He sees them as a sign of her strength, her integrity, and her self-love. This is a subtle but profound shift in the relational dynamic. The relationship is no longer a battle for control or a desperate plea for validation. It becomes a collaboration between two equals, two sovereigns whose domains may overlap but never dissolve into one another. This is the central tenet of individuation, the psychological process of becoming a unified, integrated self. For the feminine, this process often involves reclaiming her own power from the clutches of her anima, the inner masculine image, which has been projected onto the men in her life. The anima, when unexamined, whispers to her that her happiness is dependent on a man's approval, that his presence is what makes her whole. This is the source of her fear of abandonment. But through conscious work, she begins to recognize that the source of her fulfillment resides within herself. She ceases to seek her wholeness in a man and instead works on integrating her own inner, masculine, and feminine energies. She becomes her own hero, her own protector, her own king. Seneca's wisdom rings true here. The greatest obstacle to living is expectation, which hangs on tomorrow and loses today. The woman who lives by expectation, the expectation that a man will fulfill her, complete her, or rescue her, loses her present moment, her own power. The woman who releases this expectation is free. This journey is not without its challenges. It requires facing the internal resistance, the terrified little girl who still believes that safety lies in shrinking and hiding. It demands that she confront her deepest fears, the fear of loneliness, the fear of being seen as difficult or needy, the fear of the very abandonment she has so long sought to avoid. But this confrontation is the crucible in which her strength is forged. Like Marcus Aurelius contemplating his own mortality, she must face her psychological mortality, the death of her old, compliant self. The pain of this transformation is immense, but the freedom that follows is immeasurable. She learns that the most dangerous place a woman can be is in a relationship where she has lost herself. The safest place is within her own sovereign being, a fortress of self-respect built not with fear, but with an unshakable reverence for her own soul. The path to true empowerment is not paved with affirmations or platitudes. It is forged in the fire of emotional honesty. The woman who masters her boundaries has first mastered her own emotional landscape. She has learned to distinguish between her authentic feelings and the fear-based reactions of her wounded self. She understands that a man's anger or frustration at her boundary is not a reflection of her wrongness, but a projection of his own discomfort. With a powerful, autonomous woman, this is a crucial psychological distinction. When he reacts negatively, she does not rush to placate, explain, or apologize. Instead, she remains centered, calm, and detached. like an unmoving mountain in the face of a passing storm. This stoic detachment is not coldness, it is an act of profound self-respect. It is the wisdom of Epictetus in action, understanding what is within her control and what is not. She can control her own actions, her own words, her own resolve. She cannot control his emotional response, his ego's fragility, or his desire to control her. This is the very essence of self-possession. When a woman sets a boundary from this place of power, she is not setting a rule for him, but a sacred principle for herself. Her boundary is a declaration of her own spiritual and emotional sovereignty. It says, "This is who I am. This is what I require to feel safe, respected, and whole. And I will not compromise this for anyone, for any reason." The man who witnesses this will either rise to meet her at this level or recede into the shadows from which he came. She is not afraid of the latter outcome, for she understands that a man who cannot honor her sovereignty is not a man she wants in her life. His departure is not a loss, it is a purification. It clears the space for a relationship built on mutual respect and shared freedom, not on a parasitic dynamic of fear and control. The woman who still operates from fear, however, sees her potential partner's negative reaction as a catastrophic failure. She takes it as proof that she is indeed difficult, unlovable, or too much. She will often retreat, apologize, and abandon her boundary in an attempt to restore a false sense of peace. But this peace is a lie. It is the silence of a grave, the quiet of a soul that has been buried alive. In doing so, she reinforces the very pattern that keeps her small. She teaches him that her no is not a no, but a question, a test he has successfully failed. This dynamic creates a vicious cycle of resentment, passive aggression, and emotional distance. She becomes a ghost in her own life, living to please a man who, ironically, is slowly losing respect for her. He may stay, but he will not truly be with her. His presence becomes a hollow victory, a constant reminder of the self she has sacrificed at the altar of his approval. This journey is the ultimate shadow work. For the feminine, it requires her to look at the parts of herself that are desperate for external validation, the parts that believe their own existence is a favor to be granted to others. She must face the inner critic that tells her she is not enough, that she is flawed, that she must earn her right to occupy space. The woman who does this work begins to build a deep, unshakable trust in herself. She becomes her own source of security and validation. She learns that her worth is not something to be earned, but something to be recognized. It is not a prize to be won, but a state of being to be embodied. Her boundaries are simply the outward expression of this profound inner truth. They are not a weapon to push people away, but a magnet that draws in men who are aligned with her power and her vision. They are a declaration of her sovereignty, a testament to her journey of individuation, and the most powerful form of self-love she can offer herself. The culmination of this psychological journey is the realization that setting boundaries is not an act of hostility, but an act of creation. The unindividuated woman sees a boundary as a wall that separates her from a man. The woman of power sees it as a foundation upon which a genuine, emotionally rich connection can be built. She understands that a relationship without clear boundaries is not a union, it is a parasitic entanglement where one person's energy is siphoned off by the other. A man, even if he resents it at first, instinctively respects a woman who holds her ground. He may test her, consciously or unconsciously, to see if her conviction is real. If she wavers, he learns he cannot trust her word, and by extension, he cannot trust her. But if she stands firm, with a quiet, unwavering calm, she sends an unmistakable signal to his masculine unconscious. I am a woman of integrity. You can rely on my truth, for I do not lie to myself. This process of individuation is the ultimate form of radical self-love. It is the fierce, protective love of a mother for her child, but directed inward. It is the refusal to allow herself to be diminished, shrunken, or violated. This self-love is not a passive, feel-good emotion. It is an active, ongoing practice of discernment and self-protection. It requires a constant vigilance against the old, insidious patterns of people-pleasing and self-betrayal. It is the daily choice to honor her own needs, to listen to the whispers of her intuition, and to trust that her inner compass is guiding her toward her highest good. This is the heroine's journey, of the modern woman, the descent into her own psychological underworld to confront her fears, and the return to the world with a new, unshakable sense of her own power. She no longer seeks a man to complete her. She seeks a man who is whole in his own right, and who is capable of loving a woman who is also whole. The ultimate freedom, then, is the freedom from the need for external validation. It is the state of being where a man's approval is not a necessity but a welcome addition. This is the place of true power, a power so secure it does not need to be proven or announced. The woman who has arrived at this destination does not set boundaries with a dramatic flair or a righteous anger. She simply states her truth and observes the outcome with a quiet, detached curiosity. She knows that every person she encounters is a mirror, and their reaction to her boundaries is a reflection of their own inner state, not a judgment of hers. She is no longer a victim of circumstances or the whims of a man's ego. She is the architect of her own emotional reality. She has embodied the wisdom of her ancestors and the resilience of her own soul. The path was long, the shadows were deep, but the destination, a life lived on her own terms, in her own power, was worth every step.